Hi everybody and welcome to A Better You, your one-stop shop for everything self-improvement, self-discovery and self-care. I'm Emily and today we're going to talk about nuances in language. So first of all, what is nuance? Nuance is a different shade of meaning in a language term. It could be adding a different emotion, it could add a different colour to a language term. It's an advanced part of language that could be a very small part of a sentence that changes some of the meaning and context around the sentence. It's usually quite subtle, and so learning nuance is usually towards the advanced language learning stage. So why does nuance matter? Well, when you're first starting out in a language, it doesn't matter as much. So when you're learning basic sentences and grammar and vocabulary, you probably won't have that much nuance within your sentence and within your learning source materials regardless. But as you start to interact with the language on a more native level, or you're listening to that native level content, then nuance becomes a lot more important. Nuance can change the emotions attached to a sentence. It can include cultural references, which can evoke feelings in native speakers. It adds emotional depth to the language, and if you can use it, then you will certainly become more advanced in your language. So how do you learn nuances in language? It's not the easiest, to be fair. Unless you're raised in a specific country and you're raised with native speakers who are your parents, then it can be challenging to really understand the nuances behind a language. And that's because often nuances are culturally driven. And I suppose this plays into my first tip for starting to learn those nuances. To understand a specific language's nuances, you really need to understand the cultural background and the history of that language. And what's really useful here is when you're starting to learn a language or when you're getting into that advanced stage of learning a language, then it's useful to use history books and native content as references. So I found particularly useful with Turkey. There is a series on LinkU that gives the background of Turkey, that teaches you all about the history of Turkey, and that really helps to bring in some of those cultural references so that you can start to understand those nuances a little bit better. In addition to that, but linked, you can also learn the etymology of words. So again, this is kind of the linguistic history of a language. And by learning where a word is rooted from, so for example, if it is from Arabic historically, for example, then it might add some of that cultural context to that word, which might help you to start to understand the nuances behind specific phrases more. In addition to the more historical sources, you can also bring in more modern content as well. So obviously nuance doesn't just come from history. It also comes from the current culture, the current climate, how people are feeling in the country, and the slang around that. And what's particularly useful here is to start to listen to native content or to read native content. Examples could be keeping up with the news in your target language, because that might add some context as to how people are feeling in the country, as to some of that emotional nuance as to the language. In addition, you might find that there are particular shows that demonstrate some of that nuance to you in a more tangible way. Examples of this are Bir Başka Dia in Turkish, which really explores some of the cultural prejudices, some of the cultural interactions, and it really helps to see some of the phrases on screen in that kind of context, because it really helps to drive that nuance home, to really display that nuance in a very real way. So native level content is definitely worthwhile. Now you can look at native level content even if you are not advanced. Examples of this would be Netflix. You can pop on the English subtitles first of all, then you could pop on your target language second, and then you could finally do it without the subtitles. And this can help you to learn the language and help you to learn those nuances as you're learning the language. Other examples of this are obviously books and podcasts. Books I find particularly useful for nuances because you can see it in front of you and you can really study it and take your time to understand that story. So books definitely are worthwhile. If you've read a book in English and then you read it in your target language, that can sometimes help. Though it doesn't always work out that way because sometimes the books are not quite directly translated or sometimes the translations are not fantastic. So do be careful with that tip, but if you can get some native level content in book form, definitely do. And last but not least, conversations with native speakers. So I think this one goes without saying, and it can be a struggle for those of us who are more introverted. However, it's definitely worthwhile speaking to natives if you want to pick up those nuances. Nuances are not something that you can really target learning. They're not something that you can really find a list of online, usually. It is something that you really have to start observing as you're learning the language, observing as you speak to people, and because of that, conversations with natives are usually your best bet. And that's because if you're not quite understanding something, you can actually ask. And it might be as well that native speakers will share that and share some of that context around that without you actually asking. So it's definitely worth trying to get past that introversion and have some chats with native speakers. And those are my tips on learning nuances in language and why it's important. If you could, please do tell us which language you're learning in the comments below and tell us some of those nuances. Or alternatively, if you are a native speaker in a particular language and you have some particular nuances that you're aware of automatically, then again, please do share them in the comments because it might help other language learners. If you've enjoyed this video, please do properly like it. And please do obviously subscribe. Please do share this video. We would love to have you along on this journey. Thank you very much for watching.